exotics. They do some pretty cool stuff. I mean, some of them, anyway. And then there are the ones that not a lot of people use, and that's because they have been power crept out of the game completely. Today I would like to highlight 5 of those exotics, discuss how they got power crept out of the game, and if there is a way back for them. Originally, I was going to make 2 videos, one about exotics that got power crept out of the game, and one about exotics with cool functions that I just still didn't want to use. As I did more research, I came to realize that the Venn diagram of those things had a significant amount of overlap. So for the purposes of this video, I'll give a quick definition of power creep. Power creep is when something is put into a game that is stronger than everything else, usually in an attempt to entice players to play the game. For example, let's say you have a thing that does 100 damage, and that's the most damage you can do with this thing. Bungie introduces something else that deals 105 damage because they want to give you a new, stronger thing to play with. It has now power crept past the thing that does 100 damage, so now the new bar is 105 damage. Now imagine this goes on for years. That's power creep, in as short of an example as I can give. We're going to start with a much less egregious power crept exotic, one that I might get some pushback on, and that is FELWINTER'S HELM, released in Season 10. This is a helm that I felt had a lot of potential when it first released, and probably still does have some potential, but it just never got widespread use in the game. I realized that the weaken effect is stronger than the Void 3.0's weaken effect, and that it is used in some speedrun stuff, but otherwise I have not seen this thing being utilized by basically anyone in any sort of general use case. The ability works like this. You kill a target with a powerful melee or finisher, and that creates an explosion that applies weakness to targets around the target that was killed, with more powerful targets increasing the size of the explosion and the duration of the effect. It also disorients targets for a very brief time. So in lower level content, it's easy to see why this effect isn't the most popular. Weakening low level targets is more or less a waste of time because anything in, I would say, seasonal content or easier level activities just immediately dies to everything. Mid-level content is where this has a bit more effectiveness, as the weakening effect actually has some value. However, weaken is an effect that is usually a bit more targeted towards big enemies and less so on trash mobs, unless you're in, I guess, GM Nightfalls or something like that. So trying to kill a weak enemy to get a debuff on a big target is a little cumbersome when you could just focus your efforts on weakening a big target directly. Weakness also loses a lot of value in higher end content because there's a very high chance that you're going to be using Divinity, which has more or less ruined any concept of trying to use weakness in high-end content. Why bother using this exotic and put yourself in a position to potentially die when you can just do it better from farther away? It's almost like this exotic was power crept out of the game before it even came out. And now with the revamped Void subclass, we have much more access to weakness than previously, including Child of the Old Gods, which is incredibly popular, reliable, although not as strong in effect. Finally, when it comes to exotic selection in general, there are simply more reliable exotics depending on your subclass when it comes to build crafting. Controverse Hold, Phoenix Protocol, Crown of Tempest, and Osmiomancy Gloves, to name one for each individual subclass. I tried 2 builds for FELWINTER'S Helm in a solo Master Law sector, one revolving around spamming finishers, and the other utilizing Celestial Fire and stacking melee buffs. In higher end content, such as the Master Law sectors, I preferred the finisher build because of Void 3.0's Echo of Obscurity to allow me to ping pong back and forth between targets safely. Celestial Fire's damage and range were a roadblock to consistency unless I was point blank, which can't always happen. The easier the content gets though, the easier machine gunning Celestial Fire melees becomes, and you don't need the invisibility effects from Void since you're not likely to be in any real danger. I think this holds true for group content as well. The harder the group content, the more you may want to push towards finishers with Void versus Celestial Fire melee spam. Overall though, FELWINTER'S Helm is an exotic from a time before the subclass changes, and I think just has been power crept out of relevance, not that it had that much to begin with. Again, I know this helm has been used as recently as this season, but that's for very niche things like solo duality Keitel one-phase speedrunning. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say the majority of y'all are not doing that. Outside of very niche and very specific use cases, this is an exotic that had to contend against Divinity in endgame group content and now has to contend with Child of the Old Gods. The weaken effect isn't as strong, but Child of the Old Gods offers way more convenience. Titans, let's go to you. I promise the next few exotics are not going to take nearly as long to discuss. Initially, I had KHEPRI'S Horn on this list, but I don't think it's been power crept so much as it's just not very good. Mask of the Quiet One, however, I don't think has ever had relevance in the game's history, being a launch exotic, Season 1. Receiving damage gives you ability energy, and kills while you are critical will heal you. Which, if I just read it that way, it sounds like a pretty good passive exotic, so like, what's not to like? Well, the ability regeneration can be hard to notice in the heat of battle. Sure, when you're staring directly at your abilities, it's easy to see how much energy you're getting, and it's definitely not nothing. But considering the multitude of ways we are able to get ability energy back, the effect is not really that great. It's much better in lower end content as well versus higher end, since you can actually take a lot of hits and proc the effect much more often versus being in a Grandmaster Nightfall and getting two-shot by something. The healing effect is not terrible, I'll give it that. When you're critical, you heal your health on kill. It's an instant effect, it's not a restoration or anything like that, which means it's not susceptible to being hit by something else and having it stop completely. But then we take a look at something like Lorelei's, which, especially in Season 17, is just much better in almost every way. It procs automatically when you're weak, it gives you a heal over time that is not interrupted by damage, and it spawns a sunspot, provided you're using Sol Invictus, which happens to give you ability energy at the same time. I know it consumes your class ability, but most of the time, you're going to get that back very quickly. Can you use Mask of the Quiet One on any subclass? Yes, of course. But ultimately, its main problem is that it just doesn't really lead people into any sort of a build. It simply exists on you passively in the background. It doesn't progress you towards some sort of ability combo or procs or anything like that. It's boring to equip, considering the plethora of tools we have today to make us do really cool stuff, and was power crept many times over by many things. In PvE, we are trending pretty hard towards subclass-specific exotics, and this just doesn't enhance anything. If it's going to be revamped, this exotic needs to actually lead towards something. Vesper of Radius is an exotic that I've always wanted to be relevant in some way, but it's just never had the utility that I thought it needed to be good in the past. Casting Rift creates an arc shockwave around targets, and being surrounded gives you Rift energy. Rift knockback is a thing that I've always thought was pretty cool. Vesper of Radius came out in Season 2, Curse of Osiris, which was a very different game compared to today. It is a prime example of something that has been literally power crept out of relevance by something else that does the exact same thing, and that is Frost Pulse, a stasis fragment. Frost Pulse freezes targets around you when you cast your Rift, so it's not dealing damage, but it's very easy to kill frozen targets. Now, if you wanted to combine these effects, it's actually pretty fun freezing and then exploding a bunch of enemies around you. The arc damage portion ended up dealing much more damage than I remembered it doing. This footage that you're watching is from the Legendary campaign, which is 15 levels under, and I was still killing orange bar acolytes, like, sometimes. The last time I remember testing Vesper of Radius, I'm pretty sure it got a dreg on the EDZ to half health. So this was a pleasant surprise. The energy regeneration is quite noticeable when you're surrounded, but there's definitely safer ways to regenerate your class ability. But this is obviously not something that should be used offensively in anything remotely difficult. What I'm doing right now, not really the smartest way to be killing things. It is supposed to be a defensive-based exotic for when you get swarmed. There's no issue with that, but there hasn't been a need to equip defensive exotics such as this recently, thanks to our increased firepower. Defense through offense has been Destiny's MO for a little while now. Most of the meta exotics today are offensive in nature, maybe save for Ursa Furiosa, but that defense directly leads to more offense for your team. After going back and actually playing with Vesper of Radius and seeing that its damage has been dramatically increased, I don't think much actually needs to be done to it other than maybe integrating it into Arc 3.0 if that's possible. But the fact of the matter is, you can get Frost Pulse, which provides a very similar effect, which also works with your stasis fragments while allowing you to run a different exotic. Until we have more situations where playing defense is actually important beyond standing behind cover, this exotic is probably going to stay in the background. Next, we have Sealed AHAMKARA Grasps, an exotic that's been around since D1 and came back in Season 3. That is still before Forsaken. Dealing melee damage reloads your currently equipped weapon. You also gain a large benefit to airborne effectiveness for all weapons for 5 seconds after dealing melee damage, which, while nice, feels almost irrelevant to the success of this exotic. This is an exotic that technically has been power crept on, but has also had to live in a world where hunters have had Celestial Nighthawk, Raiden Flux, Orpheus Rig, and Stompies, which I will remind you are all exotics that launched in Season 1. They've been around since the launch of Destiny 2. These gloves, on the other hand, give you Grave Robber, the perk, but with the Void and Solar subclass revamps, these have a bit more of a chance nowadays. With Void 3.0, you can combo this with Stylish Executioner, since Void's melee is a smoke bomb and is otherwise just a knife stab. You stab for weakness, you shotgun something to death, you go invisible, you stab, the gun reloads, you get it. On Solar 3.0, that's where you can make a bit more happen thanks to Knock 'em Down. Knives are ranged, so you don't need to be right next to a target in order to proc a reload for Sealed AHAMKARA. Plus, if you kill something, you then get your melee back for another reload, although Sealed AHAMKARA Grasps does have an internal cooldown of a few seconds, so you're not going to be able to spam the reload effect that quickly. If you're fighting a boss, the boss isn't going to die to your melee, which makes it good for a reload or two before running out of steam. Viable? Sure. Have I seen them? Not really. But the thing that has power crept this exotic out of the way is not another exotic, not an ability, not an aspect, but a fragment from Stasis, Whisper of Impetus, which reloads all of your weapons when you hit with a stasis melee, which is also ranged. Stasis is still pretty good considering the Supreme Wellmaker Font of Might DPS strategy, with Reed's Regret still being one of the best DPS weapons in the game for raid bosses. And again, this is a fragment. I was pleasantly surprised with Sealed AHAMKARA and the new Solar 3.0 layout though. There may still be a shred of life in these things. Hunters, I'm going to hit you again. KHEPRI'S Sting. When you have full melee energy, if you punch something, you cast Smoke Bomb and you gain True Sight while in the effects of your own Smoke Bomb. Also, your Smoke Bombs deal increased damage. I hesitate to say that this exotic is completely worthless, because technically speaking, it's not. I hesitated to put it on my list because initially it's more of a PvP exotic, but it does technically fit the description of an exotic that was power crept out of the game. I know what you're thinking, and yes, the whole wall hacks situation in PvP is still very much alive with KHEPRI'S and Smoke Bomb. I don't really know anyone who's still doing it, but it is alive. You equip KHEPRI'S, you use Trapper's Ambush to dive bomb, exploding the Smoke Bomb, and bam, there's your wall hacks for 3 seconds. This effect used to be much longer a while ago, but Bungie really toned down the wall hack stuff for PvP. And as far as I can tell, this is the only utility they have in the entire game. Every other method of trying to get True Sight from these gloves is basically worthless. And you're also really only using one of the 3 parts of this exotic. This exotic might as well read, use Trapper's Ambush to gain 3 seconds of True Sight. And that's it. When it comes to the PvE side of the game, these have been power crept out of existence by Trapper's Ambush. Not that they were ever that relevant to begin with. Trapper's Ambush does a sweet dive bomb thing. It feels like the AoE effect is bigger. It makes you invisible, unlike KHEPRI'S Sting on its own. It also makes your teammates invisible, and if you combine it with Stylish Executioner, there's your True Sight. Not that True Sight is really worth that much in PvE, but Stylish leads into comboing the rest of the Hunter kit in Void 3.0. Also, you need to mess with your keybinds if you're someone who changed their melee functionality, because you need to use an uncharged melee while you have a melee charge. If you're set to use your charged melee all the time no matter what as a priority, you need to go back to the original functionality of how melee attacks worked. The only reason KHEPRI'S Sting is allowed to exist in some capacity is because of the 3 seconds of True Sight that you can get from it in PvP. That is it. 33% of the exotic in Crucible and Trials. That's really the only place that it's good. And people are still using nerfed Stompies anyway. It has no ornaments either. That's how close it is to being able to be deleted from the game. No one has had the ability to even spend money on this. What could you even do to make KHEPRI'S Sting relevant? I think you need to completely rebuild the perk from the ground up, whatever that entails. Obviously, you want to try to keep it melee focused, but Stylish Executioner exists, which does a pretty good job of the whole meleeing stuff while invisible shtick. Maybe you want to enhance Stylish Executioner with it. Maybe you want to include some sort of poison effect on there as well. Maybe revamp it if there's a new subclass or something. But I don't know. This is one where it's been power crept so hard, and it didn't really have any relevance anyway, that there's no enhancing the effect as it is right now. You need to completely redo the perk entirely. There are definitely more exotics that have been power crept out of the game, and more exotics that need a dramatic amount of buffs, but I'm going to spare you because otherwise I could just go on forever. I'm going to try to start working on a power creep video at some point soon, but these were just some exotics that I think need a lot of love, along with many others that maybe haven't been power crept out of the game, but just simply have no good uses in the game today. We've taken some of the biggest jumps in power over the past few months or so, and it's going to be interesting to see how the game ends up handling this situation over the next year. But that's it for me. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.